He thought she was just another waitress, another quiet face moving through the golden light of his restaurant. But before the night was over, Daniel Han would learn that the smallest person in the room had been carrying the heaviest kind of dignity. Aaliyah Brooks did not move when the insult touched her cheek. For one long second, the entire dining room at Soul Crown froze around her, silver forks suspended above porcelain plates, crystal glasses catching the warm chandelier light, whispers dying beneath the low hum of jazz. The restaurant sat on the 52nd floor of a Manhattan tower, wrapped in glass, polished black marble, and quiet money. Outside, the city glittered like a field of diamonds. Inside, every table was filled with people who knew how to wear wealth like armor. They wore tailored jackets, silk dresses, diamond watches, and the kind of smiles that made apologies sound expensive. Aaliyah stood in the middle of it all in her pressed white shirt and black apron, one hand still holding the tray Madison Whitmore had almost knocked from her grip. A thin streak of red wine ran down her sleeve, bright against the cotton. Her name tag had come loose and hung crooked near her heart. Madison stood 2 feet away, blonde hair shining under the lights, one hand resting on the back of her chair, as if the whole room belonged to her. She was 24, beautiful in the way money can polish a person from the outside, with a diamond bracelet at her wrist and a laugh sharp enough to cut through silence. Her friends stared, half amused, half nervous. Her brother Ethan sat beside her, his expression tight, but he said nothing. That silence hurt almost more than the humiliation. Aaliyah knew silence. She had lived with it for years. Silence when landlords raised rent and called it business. Silence when doctors explained bills like mercy had a price. Silence when customers snapped their fingers without looking at her face. She had learned to survive by keeping her voice soft, her shoulders straight, and her pain folded carefully where no one could see it. But this was different. This had happened in public under warm light and expensive ceilings in front of strangers who suddenly found their napkins fascinating. Madison tilted her head, studying Aaliyah the way some people study a stain on a white tablecloth. "Maybe next time," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for the nearby tables to hear, "you'll remember who you're serving." A small laugh escaped one of her friends. Someone at table 4 lowered their phone as if deciding whether this was entertainment or evidence. Mr. Park, the floor manager, hurried over from the host's stand, his polished shoes clicking fast against the marble. His face had already chosen fear before his mouth formed words. "Miss Whitmore, I'm so sorry," he said, bowing his head slightly, not to Aaliyah, never to Aaliyah, but to the girl whose family name appeared on donation plaques and business invitations. Then he turned to the waitress whose sleeve was wet, whose cheek still burned, whose hands had not yet started shaking only because she would not let them. "Aaliyah," he said under his breath, "apologize to the guest." The room went colder. Aaliyah's eyes lifted slowly, not angry, not pleading, just steady in a way that made Grace Miller, another waitress standing near the service station, press her lips together to keep from crying. Aaliyah swallowed once. She thought of her younger brother Marcus in a hospital bed 9 miles away, joking through pain because he hated when she worried. She thought of the bill folded in her locker beside a granola bar she had not had time to eat. She thought of the bracelet in her pocket from the hospital check-in desk, the one she had forgotten to remove before her shift. She thought of the older woman she had helped 3 months ago outside a subway entrance in the rain, a lost Korean grandmother with trembling hands and no phone battery, the woman Aaliyah had walked 6 blocks with, bought hot tea for, and left safely with a doorman without ever asking her name. Aaliyah had done what she always did. She had helped, then disappeared. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said quietly. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Madison's smile widened, because people like her often mistook quiet for weakness. "That attitude," she said, lifting one perfectly manicured finger. "That's exactly what I'm talking about." At the far end of the restaurant, at table 9, Daniel Han set down his glass. The sound was almost nothing, a soft touch of crystal against linen. But the 2 men standing discreetly near the private hallway noticed it immediately. So did the head chef behind the pass. So did Mr. Park, whose spine stiffened before he even turned around. Daniel had not spoken since the incident began. He had watched from beneath the calm shadow of a dark suit, his black hair neatly combed back, his face unreadable, his stillness more dangerous than any raised voice. Most of the room knew him only as a powerful investor, the Korean businessman whose name made bankers return calls after midnight. Very few knew that Seoul Crown was his, not on paper where cowards could find it, but in every way that mattered. He had come tonight to discuss a partnership with the Whitmore family, a deal worth enough to make arrogant people feel untouchable. He had expected flattery, numbers, polite lies over expensive food. He had not expected to see a young black waitress stand alone while the rich taught the room how cruelty dresses for dinner. Madison did not notice him at first. She was too busy enjoying the power she thought she had. "Check her bag," she said suddenly, her eyes dropping toward Aaliyah's apron pocket. "My bracelet was on this table a minute ago, and now it's gone." Aaliyah went still. Ethan looked at his sister sharply. "Madison," he warned, but she waved him off. "No, I'm serious. I want her bag checked." Mr. Park's face strained. "Aaliyah," he whispered, "just open your pockets, so we can clear this up." The words landed like a second insult. Aaliyah's fingers moved slowly to her apron. She pulled out a folded hospital bill, a half-empty pack of mints, a pen, and a thin plastic wristband from St. Mary's Medical Center. Then a small photograph slipped free and landed face-up on the marble floor. It showed Aaliyah smiling beside Marcus, both of them younger, both of them holding paper cups of cocoa in winter coats. Daniel's eyes sharpened, not because of the young man in the photo, because behind Aaliyah, half visible near the subway stairs, stood an elderly Korean woman in a beige coat, holding a cup of tea with both hands. His mother. The room did not know it yet. Madison did not know it yet. Aaliyah herself did not know it. But Daniel Han had just recognized the woman who had disappeared during a rainstorm 3 months earlier, the woman his entire security team had searched for in panic, the woman who later came home and spoke only of a kind young waitress who treated her like a person when the city had walked past her like weather. Daniel stood up.
No child scrapped.
No threat was spoken. Yet every conversation in Seoul Crown died at once. Madison finally turned, still wearing that careless smile. Daniel walked toward Aaliyah first, not toward the rich girl, not toward the family he was supposed to impress. He removed a folded white handkerchief from his jacket pocket and held it out to the waitress with both respect and distance, giving her the choice to take it. "Miss Aaliyah Brooks," he said, his voice low, controlled, and clear enough to reach the last table. "You do not owe anyone in this room an apology." Madison's smile faltered. Mr. Park forgot how to breathe. Aaliyah stared at the handkerchief, then at the man offering it, and for the first time that night, the room understood that the waitress they had looked through had been seen by the most powerful man there. The handkerchief stayed between them for a moment, white against the warm gold of the restaurant lights, and Aaliyah understood that Daniel Han was not offering pity. Pity looked down. This did not. This was a man holding a line in the air and asking the room whether it still knew the meaning of respect. Slowly, she took the cloth from him. Her fingers brushed only the edge, careful, almost embarrassed by the attention, and she pressed it to her cheek with the same quiet control she had used all night to keep herself from breaking. Madison let out a small, disbelieving laugh, but it came out thinner than before. "Are you serious right now?" she asked, looking from Daniel to Ethan, then to Mr. Park, searching for someone brave enough to join her. "She is staff." She caused a scene. Daniel did not look at her yet. That was the first thing that frightened her. Men had always looked at Madison when she spoke. Teachers, waiters, managers, men in boardrooms who smiled because her father owned half the block their offices sat on. Attention had followed her since childhood like perfume. But Daniel Han stood 3 feet away and gave his attention to Aaliyah Brooks, the woman Madison had tried to make small. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice calm enough to make the silence heavier. "Did anyone ask whether you were all right?" Aaliyah lowered the handkerchief. The question was so simple that it almost hurt. No one had asked. Not the manager who signed her schedule. Not the customers who watched. Not the man with the phone in his hand. For a second she was back at St. Mary's Medical Center that afternoon, sitting beside Marcus while the dialysis machine made its soft, steady rhythm. Her brother had smiled at her through cracked lips and asked if she had eaten. He always asked that. Even when he was the one lying under a blanket that smelled like antiseptic, even when the nurse had explained another test, another delay, another cost. Aaliyah had lied and said yes. Then she had kissed his forehead, changed in the public restroom, and taken the train downtown with her uniform folded under her coat. She had arrived at Soul Crown's 17 minutes early because being early was the only luxury she could afford. Now, standing beneath chandeliers worth more than a year of her rent, she found herself unable to answer Daniel's question. Her throat tightened, but her eyes stayed steady. "No, sir," she said at last. Mr. Park flinched, as if the two words had exposed him. Daniel nodded once, not satisfied, not surprised. Then let the room learn how it should have begun. He turned then, slowly, toward Madison Whitmore. The shift was quiet, but the air changed. Madison straightened, lifting her chin the way rich children learn to do when they confuse confidence with character. "My family is here for a private dinner," she said. "We came to discuss business, not to be lectured because a waitress cannot handle pressure." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, already understanding what. His sister did not. Daniel's expression remained smooth. "Pressure," he repeated. "Is that what you call accusing a woman of theft after humiliating her in public?" Madison's bracelet flashed as she crossed her arms. "My bracelet is missing." From the edge of the crowd, Grace Miller finally spoke, her voice small but clear. "It was not missing." Every head turned toward her. Grace stood near the service station, both hands wrapped around a stack of menus like they were the only thing keeping her upright. She was young, pale, frightened, and tired of being frightened. "I saw Miss Whitmore take it off," she said. She put it in her clutch before dessert. Madison's face hardened. "You should be careful." Grace swallowed, but did not step back. "I am being careful. That is why I am telling the truth." Something passed through the room then, not courage exactly, but the beginning of shame. People shifted in their seats. The man who had been recording lowered his phone completely. Mr. Park looked as though he wanted the marble floor to open beneath him. Daniel glanced toward the private hallway, and one of his men moved without a word. A few seconds later, the lights above the bar dimmed slightly, and the large screen usually used for private events came alive. Madison's smile disappeared before the footage even played. Aaliyah felt the restaurant tilt around her. She did not know what the camera would show. She only knew that for once, the truth was not going to have to beg to be believed. The screen showed the dining room from above, silent and merciless in its clarity. There was Madison laughing with her friends, lifting her wrist toward the chandelier light so the diamonds could catch attention. There was Aaliyah arriving with the dessert tray, careful and balanced, placing each plate with a kind of grace no one had bothered to notice. Then came the moment that changed the air. Madison glanced around, slipped the bracelet from her wrist, and dropped it into the small silver clutch beside her chair. The movement was quick, practiced, almost bored. A few people gasped. Ethan lowered his head. Madison went pale beneath her makeup, but Daniel Hahn did not look away from the screen. Neither did Aaliyah. She watched herself in the footage, watched the woman she had been only minutes earlier, standing alone while a lie gathered around her like smoke. The screen continued. Madison leaned back, touched her bare wrist, widened her eyes, and pointed toward Aaliyah with the confidence of someone who had never imagined evidence could have a memory. Then the footage showed Mr. Park stepping forward, not toward truth, but toward convenience. It showed Aaliyah emptying her pockets, her hospital bill sliding into view, the plastic wristband, the photograph, the private pieces of a life she had tried so hard to keep separate from the customers who measured people by shoes and table reservations. Aaliyah closed her eyes for 1 second, not because she was ashamed, but because being seen like that was its own kind of exposure. Daniel noticed. His jaw tightened, just once. When the screen went dark, the restaurant stayed frozen. The jazz had stopped. The kitchen bell had stopped. Even the city beyond the glass seemed far away. Madison was the first to speak, because people who build their lives on noise fear silence most. "That does not prove anything," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. I forgot where I put it. Everyone is acting insane. Grace looked down, but Aaliyah kept her eyes forward. She had learned long ago that liars often became loud when truth entered the room. Daniel turned to Ethan. Is this the judgment your family brings into business? Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. He was a handsome man in an expensive navy suit, 30 years old and polished by private schools, country clubs, and rooms where other people cleaned up after him. But there are moments when money stops being armor. This was one of them. Mr. Hahn, he said carefully, my sister was wrong. I apologize on behalf of our family. Daniel's gaze did not move. You are apologizing to the wrong person. Ethan looked at Aaliyah, and the shame on his face deepened. Miss Brooks, he said, his voice quieter now, I am sorry. What happened here was unacceptable. Madison snapped her head toward him.
Ethan.
He did not answer her. For the first time all night, someone related to Madison chose truth over protection. But Daniel was not finished. He looked at Mr. Park, who stood with both hands folded in front of him, trembling under the weight of his own cowardice. How long has Miss Brooks worked here? Daniel asked. Mr. Park swallowed. Almost 11 months, sir. Any complaints? No, sir. Late shifts. She takes them when others cannot. Customer praise? Mr. Park hesitated, because the answer was not convenient. Several notes, sir. Many guests ask for her section. Daniel nodded slowly. So, you knew her character when you asked her to prove her innocence in front of strangers. The words landed softly, but they left no place to hide. Mr. Park's face folded. I was trying to protect the restaurant. Daniel looked around the room, at the marble, the brass, the perfect table settings, the guests who had suddenly remembered their manners. A restaurant is not protected by humiliating the people who hold it together. Aaliyah felt those words move through her before she understood why. Hold it together. That was what she did. At work, at home, at the hospital, on the train at midnight with tired feet and a phone full of reminders. She held things together until her hands shook. She held things together so Marcus could keep laughing, so rent could stay paid, so nobody would worry too much. Yet here, in a room full of people who spent more on dinner than she spent on groceries in a week, someone had finally named what her labor was. Madison grabbed her clutch from the chair. This is ridiculous, she said. We are leaving. Daniel's voice stopped her before she took a step.
No, Madison froze.
Not because he shouted. He did not. He simply spoke with the calm authority of a door closing. Daniel reached into his jacket, removed a slim black card, and placed it on the nearest table. The Whitmore proposal is withdrawn. Permanently. Ethan turned sharply. Mr. Hahn, please. That deal took 8 months. And your sister ended it in 8 minutes. The room went silent again, deeper this time. Madison stared at him as if the words had arrived in a language she had never learned.
Consequence.
Daniel finally faced her fully. You thought power meant choosing who deserves dignity. You were wrong. Power is what reveals whether dignity was ever inside you. Aaliyah stood behind him, still holding the handkerchief, her breath uneven but her back straight. She had not asked for revenge. She had not asked for attention. But as Madison's certainty crumbled under the same lights where she had tried to crush someone else, Aaliyah understood something she would remember for the rest of her life. The truth had not made her smaller. It had made the room catch up to who she had been all along. Madison stood very still, her clutch pressed against her ribs, her face caught between disbelief and humiliation. For once, the room was not bending around her feelings. For once, money did not rush in to soften the landing. Ethan reached for her elbow, but she pulled away from him, her diamond bracelet now visible in her open clutch like a witness that had decided to speak. You cannot do this, she said to Daniel, each word tight and shaking. My father knows people. Daniel's expression did not change. So do I. The answer was quiet, almost gentle, and somehow that made it final. Madison looked around the dining room for support, but every face she found turned into a mirror. The woman in pearls who had watched Aaliyah empty her pockets now looked down at her plate. The man who had recorded the scene slipped his phone into his jacket, ashamed of what he had almost used as entertainment. Even Madison's friends, who had laughed when cruelty still seemed safe, had gone pale and silent. There is a special kind of loneliness that comes when applause disappears from a person who mistook it for love. Madison felt it then. She had spent years learning how to enter rooms as if she owned them, how to make servers nervous, how to smile at managers until rules moved out of her way. But Daniel Hahn had not moved. The rules had. Mr. Park stepped forward, his voice thin. "Miss Brooks, I owe you an apology." Aaliyah turned to him, still holding Daniel's handkerchief. Her sleeve had begun to dry, leaving a dark red stain that would never fully come out. "You do," she said. Not angry. Not soft.
True.
Mr. Park's eyes watered, but Aaliyah did not rescue him from the discomfort. She had spent too much of her life making other people feel better after they hurt her. Tonight, she let the silence do its work. Daniel watched her, and something almost like approval moved across his face. He had known powerful men who begged, threatened, flattered, and collapsed when cornered. Aaliyah Brooks did none of those things. She stood with a stained sleeve and a tired body, yet her dignity made the marble beneath her seem less expensive. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Miss Brooks, I will make sure you are compensated for tonight. Whatever you think is fair." Aaliyah looked at him carefully. He meant well, or at least he meant better than before. But there was still a difference between paying for damage and understanding it. "I do not want your money," she said. Ethan blinked. Madison gave a bitter laugh, but no one joined her. Aaliyah continued, her voice gaining strength one word at a time. "I want every person who works here to know they will not be treated like furniture. I want Mr. Park to stop asking staff to swallow disrespect because the customer has a famous last name. And I want your sister to say what she did out loud, not because Mr. Hahn told her to, but because she knows it was wrong." The room absorbed her words with the careful stillness of people hearing something they should have already known. Daniel turned toward Madison. "You heard her." Madison's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes shone, but whether from anger or shame, no one could tell. She looked at Aaliyah, really looked at her for the first time, and seemed surprised to find not a servant, not an obstacle, not a convenient target, but a woman with a life, a name, a brother, a history, and a spine stronger than the privilege Madison had mistaken for strength. "I lied about the bracelet," Madison said at last, each word scraped from pride. "I put it in my bag." She did not take anything. Daniel waited. The silence demanded more. Madison's throat moved. "And I should not have treated you that way." Aaliyah did not smile. Forgiveness was not a performance she owed the audience. "You should not
treat anyone that way," she said.
Madison looked down. That was the first honest thing her body had done all night. Daniel glanced toward one of his men near the hallway. "Arrange transportation for the Whitmore party. They are finished here." Ethan nodded once, defeated but respectful. Madison started to protest, then saw her brother's face and stopped. The Whitmores gathered their coats, without the slow elegance they had arrived with. Their departure was awkward, stripped of music, stripped of power, stripped of the illusion that wealth could turn cruelty into personality. When they reached the elevator, Madison looked back one last time. Not at Daniel, at Aaliyah. The elevator doors closed before she could decide what that look meant. Only then did the restaurant breathe again. But Daniel did not return to his table. He faced Mr. Park. "You are relieved of floor duties effective immediately. Human Resources will review your conduct tomorrow morning." Mr. Park nodded, broken open by the consequence, but unable to argue with it. Then Daniel turned to Grace. "Please make sure every staff member clocks out with full pay for the evening, including overtime." Grace's eyes widened. "Yes, sir." Aaliyah finally found her voice. "Mr. Hahn, you did not have to do all of this." Daniel looked at her, and for the first time, the coldness in his face eased just enough to reveal the man beneath the power. "Yes," he said softly, "I did." Then his eyes dropped to the photograph still lying on the table beside the hospital bill. He picked it up with careful hands, not touching the glossy surface more than necessary. His gaze settled on the elderly woman in the background, the beige coat, the the paper cup of tea, the face he knew better than his own. Aaliyah noticed the change in him immediately. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Daniel did not answer at first. The restaurant faded around him, replaced by a rainy evening 3 months earlier, his mother missing for 47 minutes, his security team panicked, his own heart clenched in a fear no empire could solve. Then she had come home warm, safe, holding a story about a young woman with kind eyes who had helped her without asking who she was. Daniel looked back at Aaliyah Brooks, and the room became silent again, but this time the silence was not judgment. It was recognition. Daniel held the photograph as if it weighed more than paper. The glossy corner trembled once between his fingers, so slightly that only Aaliyah noticed. On the surface, it was an ordinary picture, two siblings smiling in winter coats outside a subway entrance, the kind of memory people kept because life did not always give them many beautiful ones. But behind Aaliyah's shoulder stood his mother, Mrs. Sun Hee Han, wrapped in the beige wool coat he had bought her for her 70th birthday, both hands around a paper cup of tea. Daniel remembered that coat soaked with rain. He remembered the phone call from her nurse, the rush of cars through midtown traffic, the sharp helplessness of being a man everyone feared and still not knowing where his own mother was. For 47 minutes, his money had meant nothing. His reputation had meant nothing. Every locked door in the city could open for him, except the one that mattered. Then his mother had appeared in the lobby of her building, damp but calm, holding that same cup, speaking softly about a young woman who had found her confused near the station, walked beside her in the rain, bought her tea, and waited until the doorman knew her name. "She called me ma'am," his mother had said later, smiling through exhaustion. Not grandmother, not poor thing, not trouble.
Mom.
Daniel had searched for that woman for weeks, but his mother knew only her first name, Aaliyah. In a city of millions, kindness had vanished back into the crowd. Now it stood in front of him with a stained sleeve, tired eyes, and a hospital bill folded beside a plastic wristband. "You helped my mother," Daniel said. The words were low, but they moved through the restaurant like a door opening. Aaliyah blinked. "Your mother?" He turned the photograph toward her, careful not to point too closely, and indicated the elderly woman in the background. Aaliyah leaned in, then recognition softened her face. "Mrs. Han," she whispered. "She told me her last name, but I did not connect it. She was lost."
It was
raining. Anyone would have helped her. Daniel's eyes held hers.
"No," he said.
They did not. The truth settled between them. Aaliyah looked down because gratitude from powerful people frightened her almost as much as cruelty from careless ones.
Gratitude could become debt.
Debt could become ownership. She had spent her whole life avoiding both. "I did not do it for a reward," she said. "I know. I did not even know who she was. That is why it mattered." The simplicity of his answer took the air from her lungs. Around them, the staff stood very still. Grace wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand. The chef, an older Korean man named Mr. Choi, bowed his head slightly, as though understanding something sacred had entered the room without announcement. Daniel placed the photograph gently on the table, beside the hospital bill. He did not touch the bill, but his eyes read enough. St. Mary's Medical Center. Nephrology Department. Balance stew. Marcus Brooks. The numbers were printed in black ink, cold and exact, the kind of numbers that did not care how tired a sister was. Aaliyah followed his gaze and quickly reached for the paper, folding it with practiced embarrassment. "That is private," she said, not sharply, but with the firmness of someone protecting the last corner of herself. Daniel stepped back at once. "You are right." That, more than anything, surprised her. He did not argue. He did not use concern as permission. He simply gave the boundary respect. "My brother is fine," she added, even though they both knew fine was sometimes just a word people used when the truth was too heavy for dinner guests. Daniel nodded, accepting the lie for what it was, a shield, not an insult. "Mrs. Han asked me to find you," he said. "She wanted to thank you herself." Aaliyah's eyes flickered. For the first time that night, her composure almost broke for a reason other than pain. "She was kind to me," Aaliyah said. "She held my hand the whole way and kept apologizing because her shoes were wet." I told her wet shoes were not a crime. A faint warmth passed through Daniel's face, brief as candlelight. That sounds like her. The room was listening now, but not with the greedy curiosity from before. This silence had changed. It was gentler, humbled. Aaliyah stood in the center of people who had watched her be accused, and now they were hearing that before anyone in the restaurant saw her worth, an elderly woman in the rain had already received it. Daniel turned to the staff. Clear table 9. A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Prepare proper dinner. Aaliyah stiffened. Mr. Hahn, I still have work to do. Not tonight. His voice remained calm. Tonight, you are a guest. She shook her head once, instinctively. I cannot sit in the middle of my shift while everyone else works. Grace stepped forward before fear could stop her. We have it, Aaliyah. Mr. Choi nodded from the kitchen pass. You eat. Aaliyah looked around, and something inside her loosened painfully. She was used to carrying others, not being carried by them. Daniel pulled out the chair at table 9, the same table where Madison had expected power to protect her. He did not touch Aaliyah. He simply stood beside the chair and waited. Choice, not command. Aaliyah looked at the chair, then at the faces around her, then at the stained cuff of her sleeve. Slowly, she sat down. The room did not applaud. It was better than applause. It was quiet enough to let her keep her dignity. The first course arrived without ceremony because Daniel had given one quiet instruction, and everyone understood that dignity did not need decoration. Mr. Choi sent out a bowl of warm short rib soup, a plate of rice, small dishes of kimchi, cucumber salad, and glazed potatoes, the kind of food that smelled like comfort before it reached the table. Aaliyah sat with both hands in her lap, shoulders still held too high, as if some part of her expected someone to tell her she had misunderstood and needed to stand back up. The chair felt too soft. The linen felt too white. The view from table 9 stretched across Manhattan in glittering lines, beautiful and impossible, and all she could think about was the break room downstairs with its buzzing vending machine and the granola bar still waiting in her locker. Daniel sat across from her, not at the head of the table, not above her, but across, where equals could look at each other without one person shrinking. That choice did not escape her. Nothing about him escaped the room. The other guests tried to return to their meals, but their conversations had changed.
Voices were lower now.
Forks moved carefully. People who had ignored the staff all night began saying please and thank you, as if remembering an old language. Grace passed behind Aaliyah with a fresh glass of water and squeezed the back of her chair for one brief second, a small signal that said, "You are not alone." Aaliyah almost broke then, not from what Madison had done, but from the kindness that came after. Pain she knew how to hold. Kindness was harder. You do not have to eat if you are uncomfortable, Daniel said. His voice was still calm, but it had lost the steel he had used with the Whitmores. I just did not want you ending this night hungry. Aaliyah looked at the soup, steam rising in soft curls. Her stomach tightened with a hunger she had been ignoring since noon. My brother would laugh at me, she said quietly. He says I feed everybody except myself. Daniel's eyes rested on her face. Marcus. She nodded, then gave a small, guarded smile. He is 22. He thinks he is funnier than he is. You take care of him. It was not a question. Aaliyah picked up the spoon, but did not eat yet. Our mother passed when I was 19. Our aunt tried to help, but she had her own bills, her own knees hurting, her own life. Marcus got sick later. So yes, I take care of him. She said it plainly, without asking for sympathy, and that made the words heavier. Daniel had heard men exaggerate ordinary burdens into tragedies. Aaliyah spoke of sacrifice like weather, something that arrived and had to be lived through. Does he know what happened tonight? Daniel asked. No, the answer came too fast. She lowered her eyes. And he will not. He has enough to worry about. Daniel leaned back slightly. You protect him from pain by carrying it alone. Aaliyah's spoon stilled. The words were too close. Outside the glass, traffic moved far below in thin ribbons of red and white. Inside, the candle between them flickered against the polished surface of the table. Sometimes that is what family means, she said. Sometimes, Daniel replied. And sometimes family means letting someone stand beside you before the weight breaks your back. Aaliyah looked up then, surprised by the softness beneath the sentence. For the first time, she wondered what kind of son Daniel Hahn was when the room was not watching. She thought of Mrs. Hahn in the rain, apologizing for walking slowly, worrying that she was causing trouble, smiling when Aaliyah told her she had nowhere more important to be. There had been tenderness in that old woman, and now Aaliyah could see a shadow of it in her son, buried under expensive suits and careful silence. "Your mother was scared that night," Aaliyah said. "But she kept asking whether I was getting wet. I told her I was fine. She told me young people say fine when they mean tired." Daniel's mouth softened at the edge. "She says that to me. She sounds smart. She is the smartest person I know." The answer came so quickly that Aaliyah believed it. The soup cooled between them. She finally took a spoonful, and the warmth moved through her chest before she could stop her eyes from closing for half a second. It tasted like something made by hands that cared whether a person survived the night. When she opened her eyes, Daniel was looking away, giving her privacy even in a public room. That small mercy settled somewhere deep. Mr. Choi appeared near the table, wiping his hands on a clean towel, his face stern with emotion. "Miss Brooks," he said, bowing his head. "You eat more. Too skinny from working too hard." Aaliyah let out a tiny laugh, the first real sound of relief she had made all evening. "Yes, chef." Around the dining room, a few staff members smiled. The air changed again, slowly, from tension to repair. But Daniel knew repair was not the same as justice. He looked toward the manager station, where Mr. Park stood alone, stripped of authority and finally understanding that fear had made him cruel in smaller ways. Daniel would deal with the policies, the training, the quiet habits that let rich customers turn workers into targets. Not tomorrow as a public performance, but tonight, before the lesson cooled. He turned back to Aaliyah. "There will be changes here," he said. "Not because of what happened to my mother. Because of what happened to you." Aaliyah swallowed, the spoon warm in her hand. "I do not want anyone losing their job because of me." "They will not lose anything because of you," Daniel said. "They will answer for their own choices." The words landed gently, but they landed. Aaliyah had spent years accepting blame for storms she did not create. Hearing the boundaries spoken aloud felt strange, almost frightening. She looked around at the room that had watched her humiliation and now watched her eat. Nothing about the marble had changed. Nothing about the chandeliers, the skyline, or the white tablecloths. But the room itself felt different because she was different inside it. She was no longer standing at the edge of someone else's comfort. She was seated at the center of her own worth. And for the first time that night, Aaliyah Brooks lifted the spoon again without trembling. By the time Aaliyah finished the soup, the restaurant had changed in ways no renovation could create. The chandeliers still glowed over polished marble, the skyline still glittered beyond the glass, and the silverware still rested beside plates that cost more than some families spent on groceries in a week. But the invisible order of the room had shifted. The people who served were no longer moving like shadows. They stood taller. They made eye contact. They placed dishes with the quiet assurance of people who had just been reminded that work was not weakness. Daniel saw it from table 9, and he understood that justice was never only about one moment. If a room could humiliate a woman in public, then a room could learn in public as well. He rose from his chair, not dramatically, not with anger, but with the kind of calm that made everyone listen before he spoke. "Mr. Choi," he said. The chef stepped forward from the kitchen pass, hands folded respectfully in front of his apron. "Yes, sir." Daniel looked toward Grace, then toward the bussers, hosts, servers, dishwashers, and line cooks watching from every corner of Seoul Crown. "Gather the staff. For 5 minutes. The guests can wait." A few diners looked uncomfortable, but no one complained. Not after what they had witnessed. Within moments, the staff formed a loose half-circle near the bar, some still holding towels, some with order pads tucked in their aprons, some with tired eyes that had seen too many versions of the same disrespect. Aaliyah began to stand from table 9, instinct pulling her back toward duty, but Grace touched her shoulder. Stay, she whispered. You are part of this from there. Daniel turned to them all. Tonight, this restaurant failed one of its own. The words were simple, and because they were simple, no one could hide behind them. Mr. Park stood near the host's stand, his face pale, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had lost color. Daniel did not point at him.
He did not need to.
A customer's wealth does not outrank an employee's humanity, Daniel continued. A famous last name does not turn disrespect into service. And no one who works under this roof will ever again be asked to prove their innocence before the truth has been examined. The staff listened without moving. Some of them had dreamed of hearing words like that from a manager, an owner, anyone with the power to make them real. Daniel reached into his jacket and removed a folded document from the inner pocket, the Whitmore proposal Ethan had expected him to sign that night. 8 months of negotiations, millions of dollars in projected development, private dining rooms, luxury towers, headlines written before the ink had dried. Daniel tore nothing, destroyed nothing, made no display. He simply placed the unsigned document on the bar. This was supposed to be the most valuable paper in this room, he said. Then he looked toward Aaliyah. It is not. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt like something being rebuilt. Daniel turned to Grace. Starting tonight, every employee receives paid transportation home after late shifts. Every complaint involving disrespect from a guest is documented and reviewed by someone above the floor manager. Any customer who insults, threatens, falsely accuses, or degrades staff will be removed from the reservation system permanently. Grace's eyes widened with each sentence. A busser named Miguel whispered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. Mr. Choi nodded once, hard, as if a knot he had carried for years had finally loosened. Daniel continued, and Miss Brooks will be paid for the rest of the week while she decides whether she wants to return. No pressure. No questions. Aaliyah set down her spoon. Mr. Han, she said softly, but he raised one hand, not to silence her, only to reassure her. Choice, he said. That is all. The word struck her harder than any gift could have. Choice was what poverty stole first. Choice about sleep. Choice about food. Choice about whether to answer the phone when the hospital called, because good news never seemed to come after dinner. Daniel was offering something more dangerous than money. He was offering space to breathe. Then the elevator doors opened across the restaurant, and an elderly woman stepped out with a silver cane, a beige coat folded over one arm, and a face that made Daniel's entire posture change. Mrs. Sun Hee Han entered as if she had walked out of Aaliyah's memory, small, elegant, and bright-eyed beneath soft gray hair. A young assistant hovered behind her, clearly worried, but Mrs. Han waved her off with the gentle impatience of a mother who had ignored stronger people than that. Daniel, she said, her Korean accent warm around his name. You found her. Daniel crossed to his mother at once, all the steel leaving him in a single breath. Iomioni, you should be resting. I rested enough. Her eyes moved past him and landed on Aaliyah. The room seemed to fold itself around that look. Aaliyah stood slowly, one hand against the edge of the table. Mrs. Han smiled with recognition, not surprise, as though kindness had a face she had been waiting to see again. My tea girl, she said softly. Aaliyah's eyes filled before she could stop them.
Mom.
Mrs. Han walked to her, each step measured but certain. When she reached table 9, she took Aaliyah's hands in both of hers. You stayed with me in the rain, she said. You were not embarrassed by my confusion. You did not hurry me. That day, you gave an old woman her dignity. Aaliyah shook her head, overwhelmed. I only did what anyone should do. Mrs. Han's smile trembled.
Should do, yes.
But did not. Daniel stood behind his mother, quiet now, no longer the most powerful figure in the room, but a son watching a debt of the heart being named. Mrs. Han turned to the staff, then to the guests, her small voice somehow carrying farther than Madison's cruelty ever had. Remember this young woman. Not because my son knows her now, because before anyone important was watching, she was already good. The room went completely still. Aaliyah bowed her head, tears slipping free at last, but there was no shame in them anymore. They were not the tears Madison had tried to force from her. They were the tears that come when the world, for one rare moment, tells the truth out loud. Mrs. Hahn did not release Aaliyah's hands right away. Her palms were small and warm, the skin delicate with age, but there was a steadiness in her grip that made Aaliyah feel anchored in the middle of a room that had nearly swallowed her whole. The old woman looked at the stained cuff of Aaliyah's sleeve, then at the untouched dishes cooling on table 9, and her expression changed in a way that reminded Daniel of every correction he had received as a boy without a single raised word. "You have not eaten enough," Mrs. Hahn said. Aaliyah blinked through her tears, startled into a soft laugh. "I'm sorry,
Mom.
do not apologize for being hungry." The sentence was gentle, but it carried the weight of a commandment. A few staff members lowered their eyes, not from shame this time, but because the words found them too. In restaurants like Soul Crown, hunger had always been something employees managed quietly between rushes: a bite of cold rice near the dish station, half a sandwich eaten standing up, coffee replacing meals until the body forgot how to ask nicely. Mrs. Hahn guided Aaliyah back into the chair, as if seating a granddaughter. Daniel pulled out a second chair for his mother, and she sat beside Aaliyah instead of across from her, placing herself not as a witness, but as family. "Now," Mrs. Hahn said, nodding toward the soup, "eat, while it is warm enough to forgive the night." Aaliyah picked up the spoon, and this time her hand did not tremble. The restaurant remained open, but no one rushed her. Mr. Choi sent out fresh rice and grilled vegetables, then quietly added honey tea because Mrs. Hahn liked it after emotional evenings. Grace brought extra napkins and pretended not to cry. Miguel returned to polishing glasses, but his shoulders stayed higher than before. Even the guests seemed to understand they were no longer the center of the room. Daniel stepped aside to speak with the temporary supervisor, a calm woman from accounting named Helen Cho, who had been called upstairs after Mr. Park was relieved. His instructions were brief, precise, and impossible to misunderstand. Every staff member who witnessed the incident would be offered a paid meeting with Human Resources. The security footage would be preserved. A written apology would be requested from the Whitmore family, not for public relations, but for Aaliyah's records. The restaurant would close 1 hour early, with full pay for the staff. No one would lose tips because one rich girl had mistaken cruelty for power. Aaliyah heard pieces of it and tried to stand again. Mrs. Hahn placed one finger on her wrist.
"See."
"Aaliyah, Saturday, you have a difficult time receiving help," the older woman observed. Aaliyah looked down at her bowl. "I have had practice not expecting it." Mrs. Hahn nodded as if the answer did not surprise her. That kind of practice makes a person strong, but it can also make kindness feel suspicious. Aaliyah's throat tightened. Across the room, Daniel had stopped speaking. He did not turn, but he was listening. "I am grateful," Aaliyah said carefully. "I just do not want this night to become something people use to feel noble for a few minutes before everything goes back to the way it was." Mrs. Hahn smiled, and there was steel inside the softness. "Then do not let them make you a symbol before they remember you are a person." Aaliyah looked at her. That was exactly the fear she had not known how to name. She did not want to be the poor waitress everyone pitied until the next reservation arrived. She did not want her brother's illness whispered over dessert. She did not want Madison's cruelty to become the most important thing about her. Daniel returned to the table at that moment, his face quiet. "Miss Brooks," he said, "my mother is right. Nothing happens from here without your choice." Aaliyah studied him, searching for the trap that usually lived inside generous offers. She found none, only patience. "Then I want the staff protected first," she said. "Not just me. All of us. Written policies. Posted clearly. Managers trained. Guests warned before they think money gives them permission." Helen Cho, standing nearby with a tablet, nodded and began typing. Daniel did not hesitate. "Done." Aaliyah drew a breath. "And I want Mr. Park to learn from this, if he can. Do not just throw him away to prove a point." Daniel's eyes shifted toward the former manager, who stood alone near the closed host stand, stripped of confidence and visibly shaken. "Accountability first," Daniel said. "Then the chance to earn trust if the staff agrees." Aaliyah accepted that with a small nod. Mrs. Han's thumb brushed lightly over the back of Aaliyah's hand. Good, she said. Mercy with a spine. The words moved through Daniel like an old lesson returning home. He had built much of his life around control, around making sure no one under his name could be touched by disrespect or danger. But Aaliyah's kind of strength was different. It did not crush. It corrected. It did not beg to be seen. It simply remained true until the room had no choice but to see it. Near the elevator, a couple who had watched the whole night stood to leave. The man paused near Aaliyah's table, his expensive coat folded over one arm. Miss Brooks, he said awkwardly. I should have said something earlier. I am sorry I did not. Aaliyah looked at him for a long moment. Say something next time, she replied. He nodded, chastened, and left without another word. That small exchange rippled farther than any speech Daniel could have made. One by one, people began to understand that regret was not the same as repair. The evening was almost over when Mrs. Han lifted her cup of honey tea. To Miss Brooks, she said softly. No one
Clapped.
No one made a spectacle, but every staff member who could see her lifted something in return, a water glass, a coffee cup, a clean spoon from the service station. Aaliyah looked around the room, overwhelmed by the quiet respect surrounding her. For most of her life, she had been thanked for working hard only when working hard made someone else comfortable. Tonight, for the first time, she was honored not for what she endured, but for who she had refused to stop being. By 10:45 that night, Soul Crown no longer felt like a restaurant recovering from a scandal. It felt like a room that had been washed clean by truth. The last guests left quietly, some with bowed heads, some with uncomfortable eyes, each carrying away a version of the story they would never be able to tell without revealing where they had stood inside it. The staff stayed behind under the softened lights, moving slowly now that the performance of service was over. Chairs were straightened. Glasses were gathered. White tablecloths were lifted from corners and folded with tired hands. Aaliyah stood near table 9 with her hospital bill back in her pocket and Daniel's handkerchief folded carefully in her palm. She had tried to return it 3 times. Each time, Mrs. Han had clicked her tongue and told her to keep it until the night stopped hurting. Daniel walked his mother to the elevator, one hand hovering near her elbow without rushing her steps. Before she entered, Mrs. Han turned back to Aaliyah. Come visit me, she said. Not because you owe me, because I would like to know the woman who knows how to stop in the rain. Aaliyah's smile trembled. I would like that, ma'am. Sunhee, the older woman corrected gently. When you are ready. The elevator doors closed, and for a moment Daniel remained facing them, the powerful outline of him softened by the reflection in the brass. Then he returned to Aaliyah. The city beyond the glass had deepened into midnight blue, and the lights below looked smaller than they had earlier, as if the world itself had stepped back. Your car is waiting downstairs, Daniel said. Grace is going with you. Pay transportation, not a favor. Aaliyah looked at him, half grateful, half overwhelmed. You keep saying things are not favors. Because favors can become chains. His eyes held hers with quiet honesty. Respect should not. She looked down at the handkerchief. The fabric was still clean except for the faint mark where it had touched her cheek, proof that something ugly had happened and had not been allowed to become the end of the story. What happens tomorrow? She asked. Daniel glanced toward the staff, where Helen Cho was gathering statements and Mr. Choi was packing food for every employee to take home. Tomorrow, the policies begin. Mr. Park faces review. The Whitmore family receives formal notice. And you decide what you want, without anyone pushing you toward gratitude. Aaliyah nodded slowly, but there was one fear left in her eyes. And Marcus. Daniel's expression changed only slightly, but enough for her to see he had understood the question beneath the question. My mother asked whether your brother had the care he needed, he said. I told her I did not know. Aaliyah's fingers tightened around the handkerchief. Please do not make my brother part of this. I will not. Daniel's voice was firm. No decision about him will be made without you. But there are doctors my mother trusts and a patient fund connected to St. Mary's that does not require your name to become anyone's charity case. If you want information, Helen can give it to you. If you do not, nothing changes. Aaliyah stared at him, searching again for ownership, for pressure, for the invisible price that often followed help. She found none, only an open door and no hand on her back forcing her through it. Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. "I want the information," she said. "That is all for now." Daniel nodded. "That is enough." Grace appeared by the service station with Aaliyah's coat and bag, her own eyes red from trying not to cry again. "Ready?" she asked. Aaliyah looked around the dining room one last time. Hours earlier, she had stood in this same space with shame burning her face while strangers judged her by the uniform on her body. Now the same room held a different memory. Mr. Choi lifted a hand from the kitchen pass. Miguel nodded from behind the bar. Helen gave her a respectful smile. Even Mr. Park, standing alone near the host stand, lowered his head, not asking forgiveness, not performing regret, simply acknowledging the woman he had failed to protect. Aaliyah did not feel victorious. Victory sounded too loud for what this was. She felt restored. There is a difference. Victory stands over someone. Restoration lets a person stand again. She walked toward the elevator with Grace beside her, her steps steady on the marble. Before the doors opened, Daniel spoke her name. "Miss Brooks." She turned. He stood near table 9, hands at his sides, no command in his posture, no ownership in his gaze. "My mother was right," he said. "Before anyone important was watching, you were already good." Aaliyah held the words carefully, the way she held the handkerchief, knowing both would stay with her longer than the stain on her sleeve. "Good night, Mr. Han," she said. "Good night, Miss Brooks." The elevator doors closed softly. Downstairs, Manhattan waited with its noise, its cold sidewalks, its late trains, its hospitals, its bills, its endless tests of ordinary courage. But Aaliyah Brooks stepped into that night differently than she had entered it. Her back was straight. Her eyes were clear. And somewhere 52 floors above the city, in a restaurant of glass and gold, the people who had watched her be humiliated would remember the silence that followed, the truth that rose, and the woman who never surrendered her dignity. And that night, the world remembered what dignity looks like.